The coffee mug shattered against the wall. "You're fired, Martinez." The words cut through the morning air like a blade. 37 years of service. Gone. Just like that. Joe Martinez stood frozen in the doorway of the VA hospital break room. Coffee dripped down the beige paint. His weathered hands trembled, not from fear, but from something deeper. Something that had been building for months. "Pack your things," Director Harrison spat, his face red with rage. "Security will escort you out." The other janitors looked away. Shame painted their faces. Nobody wanted to be next. Joe's voice came out as a whisper. "Sir, I can explain." "Explain what?" "That you've been stealing from veterans, from heroes?" Harrison's voice boomed across the hallway. Nurses stopped walking. Patients in wheelchairs turned their heads. "We found the evidence in your locker, Martinez. Painkillers, enough to supply half the street." The accusation hit like a physical blow. Joe's knees nearly buckled. "I didn't. Save it for the police." The security guard's grip was firm, but not cruel. Joe had seen worse treatment. Much worse. Outside, the October wind bit through his thin uniform. Leaves scattered across the parking lot like broken promises. He'd walked through these doors every morning for 4 decades. Now they were closing behind him forever. His truck wouldn't start. Of course it wouldn't. He sat there in the silence, watching hospital staff point through the windows. Their mouths moved with ugly words he couldn't hear, but could feel in his bones. The radio crackled to life. "This is dispatch. We have a 10 to 15 at the VA hospital. Suspect is a Hispanic male, late 60s, driving a blue Chevy pickup. Joe turned it off. His hands shook as he tried the ignition again. Click. Nothing. A knock on the window made him jump. Officer Bradley stood there, hand on his holster. Joe had seen him around the hospital before. "Nice kid," reminded him of someone he used to know. "Mr. Martinez, I need you to step out of the vehicle." Joe opened the door slowly. His joints protested. Age and old injuries made every movement deliberate. "You're under arrest for theft of controlled substances." The handcuffs were cold against his wrists. Behind him, the hospital buzzed with activity. Someone was taking pictures with their phone. By evening, it would be on social media. By morning, the whole city would know. Joe Martinez, thief, disgrace. Nobody would remember the rest. The holding cell smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. Joe sat on the narrow bench, staring at his hands. These hands had held rifles in jungles, had carried wounded soldiers, had cleaned floors for 4 decades without complaint. Now they were the hands of a criminal, Martinez. The guard's voice echoed off concrete walls. "Your lawyer's here." The public defender looked about 12 years old. Fresh suit, fresh face, fresh out of law school. He opened a manila folder and sighed. "This doesn't look good, Mr. Martinez. They found 4 bottles of OxyContin in your locker. Security footage shows you in the pharmacy after hours." "I cleaned the pharmacy," Joe said quietly. "Every night for 37 years. The bottles had your fingerprints. I clean everything." "Of course they have my fingerprints." The lawyer flipped through pages. "Your coworkers say you've been acting strange lately. Nervous, jumpy, one says. You've been talking to yourself." Joe closed his eyes. The flashbacks had been getting worse. Louder, more frequent. Sometimes he forgot where he was. Sometimes he forgot when he was, "Mr. Martinez, I didn't steal anything." "Then how do you explain?" "I can't." Joe's voice was barely audible. "But I didn't steal from those boys. I'd never steal from them." The lawyer closed the folder. "The DA is offering a plea deal. Plead guilty, serve 18 months, make restitution. You'll be out in 6 months with good behavior. And if I don't, 20 years, maybe more." Joe looked at the concrete wall. 20 years meant dying in prison. At his age, 18 months might mean the same thing. I need time to think. You hive until tomorrow. The story broke on the 6 o'clock news. Hospital janitor accused of stealing painkillers from veterans. Joe's mugshot filled the screen. Gray hair unkempt. Eyes hollow with exhaustion. He looked guilty. He looked like exactly what they said he was. The reporter stood outside the VA hospital. Martinez had access to the pharmacy and several restricted areas. Hospital staff describe him as a loner who rarely spoke to anyone. They interviewed Director Harrison. This is a betrayal of trust. These medications were meant for our nation's heroes. Mr. Martinez has dishonored everyone who served. They didn't mention his 37 years of perfect attendance. They didn't mention the Christmas mornings he'd worked so others could be with their families. They didn't mention the countless times he'd found veterans passed out in bathrooms and stayed with them until help arrived. They just showed the mugshot at apartments across the city. People shook their heads in disgust. At dinner tables, families discussed the moral decay of society. On social media, the anger was swift and merciless. Disgusting. Hope he rots in prison. Stealing from veterans? There's a special place in hell. Joe Martinez became the face of everything wrong with the world. The preliminary hearing was a formality. The evidence was overwhelming. The case was airtight. Joe sat in the defendant's chair, wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on his shrinking frame. He'd lost weight. In jail, sleep was elusive. Food was tasteless. Your Honor, the prosecutor began. The defendant systematically stole controlled substances from veterans who sacrificed everything for this country. This wasn't a crime of desperation. This was calculated theft from our most vulnerable citizens. Joe's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, my client has served this community for nearly 4 decades. He has no prior record. He's asking for mercy. Mercy? The prosecutor laughed. Where was his mercy when he was stealing from wounded warriors? The judge looked down at Joe. Mr. Martinez, you have an opportunity to address the court. Joe stood slowly. His legs felt like concrete. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, VA staff, angry citizens who'd come to watch justice served. I didn't do this, he said quietly. I've spent my whole life serving. First in the Army, then at the hospital. I would never hurt those boys. Never, someone in the gallery snorted. Lear, the judge banged his gavel. I'll hear the plea. Joe's lawyer touched his arm. The plea deal was still on the table. 18 months. He could survive 18 months. Not guilty, Your Honor. A ripple of surprise went through the courtroom. The prosecutor smiled. He'd just made this case much easier. The trial began 3 weeks later. The prosecution's case was methodical, devastating. They showed security footage of Joe entering the pharmacy. They showed the bottles in his locker. They showed his fingerprints on everything. Expert witnesses testified about addiction patterns. Character witnesses describe his odd behavior. The evidence piled up like snow in a blizzard. Joe's defense was thin. His lawyer was overworked, underpaid, and outgunned. They called a few character witnesses, other janitors who said he was quiet but decent. A nurse who remembered him helping her with a difficult patient once. It wasn't enough. The prosecution painted a picture of a man who'd lost himself to desperation, maybe drugs, maybe gambling debts, maybe just the slow corruption that comes with too much access and too little oversight. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecutor said in closing, the defendant wants you to believe he's a victim. But the real victims are the veterans he stole from, the heroes he betrayed. Don't let him hide behind his uniform from 50 years ago. Judge him by his actions today. The jury deliberated for 47 minutes, guilty on all counts. Joe Martinez disappeared into the system. The story faded from the news cycle. People moved on to other outrages, other betrayals. At the VA hospital, they hired a new janitor, a young man who worked quickly and kept his head down. Joe's apartment was cleaned out. His few possessions went to Goodwill. His truck was sold to pay court costs. He became a number in the system. Inmate 47,291. Nothing more. The other prisoners left him alone. He was old, quiet, and posed no threat. He cleaned floors. In the prison kitchen. He read books from the library. He wrote letters that nobody answered. Sometimes, late at night, he'd lie on his narrow bunk and remember. The jungle. The hospital. The faces of young men who'd needed help. He'd failed them all. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Joe was mopping the prison cafeteria when the guard called his name. Mail was rare. Visitors were non-existent. He couldn't imagine who would write to him. The envelope was thick, official. The return address made his hands shake. Department of Defense, Pentagon, Washington, D.C. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Formal language. Government letterhead. Mr. Martinez, we regret to inform you that classified materials related to Operation Phoenix have been declassified. Your service record has been updated accordingly. Please contact this office at your earliest convenience. Joe rated 3 times. Operation Phoenix. He hadn't heard that name in 50 years. He'd never told anyone about Operation Phoenix. The phone call came the next morning. Is this Joseph Martinez? The voice was crisp, professional. Yes, this is Colonel Patricia Williams, Pentagon personnel. Sir, we have a situation that requires your immediate attention. Sir, nobody had called. Him, sir, in years. I'm in prison, Colonel. We're aware of your circumstances, sir. We're also aware they may be ... incorrect. Joe's heart hammered against his ribs. What do you mean? Sir, I'm not authorized to discuss details over the phone. But we've uncovered evidence that suggests your recent legal troubles may be connected to your classified service. We're sending a team to interview you. I don't understand. You will, sir. We'll be there tomorrow. They came in suits and badges. 3 of them, FBI, Pentagon, another agency Joe didn't recognize. The prison warden personally escorted them to the interview room. He looked confused, maybe a little scared. Federal agents didn't usually visit his prison to interview 70-year-old janitors. The lead agent introduced herself as Special Agent Chun. She had kind eyes and a firm handshake. Mr. Martinez, we need to ask you about your time in Vietnam. Specifically, about Operation Phoenix. Joe's blood turned to ice. That's classified. Not anymore. Parts of it were declassified last month. We're investigating whether your recent legal troubles are connected to your service. I don't understand. Agent Chun opened a file. 3 other Operation Phoenix veterans have been arrested in the past year. All on questionable charges. All after someone tried to contact them about their service. Joe's mind raced. Someone tried to contact me a few months ago. Tell us about that. A man called the hospital. Said he was writing a book about Vietnam. Wanted to interview me about my service. I told him I couldn't talk about it. Did he give you a name? Williams. Or Williamson, something like that. The agents exchanged glances. Agent Chun made a note. Mr. Martinez, we believe someone is targeting Operation Phoenix veterans. Using false evidence to discredit you. To silence you. But I never talked about it. Never told anyone. You didn't have to. Your name was in the files. When they were declassified, certain people got nervous. Joe felt dizzy. What are you saying? We're saying you were framed, sir. We're saying someone planted those drugs in your locker. The evidence unraveled quickly after that security footage from the hospital showed a man in coveralls accessing Joe's locker at 3 a.m. The same man who'd been asking questions about Operation Phoenix veterans. The bottles of OxyContin had been reported missing from a pharmacy across town. The same pharmacy where the mysterious caller had worked as a consultant. Phone records showed calls between the caller and Director Harrison. Large deposits appeared in Harrison's bank account. The conspiracy was simple but effective. Target the veterans. Discredit them. Make sure they could never talk about what they'd seen in the jungle. 50 years ago, Joe Martinez wasn't a thief. He was a witness. The Pentagon team worked fast. Within days, federal prosecutors had taken over the case. Harrison was arrested. The real thief was in custody. The charges against Joe were dropped, but the damage was done. The story of his exoneration got buried on page 6. The original accusations had been front-page news. The truth was just a footnote. Joe walked out of prison to an empty parking lot. No cameras, no reporters. No apologies, just silence. He took a bus back to the city. His apartment was gone. His job was gone. His reputation was gone. He found a cheap motel and paid for a week. Sat on the bed and stared at the water stains on the ceiling. 70 years old, broke, alone. He'd survived Vietnam. He'd survived poverty. He'd survived 4 decades of invisible work. But he wasn't sure he could survive this. The knock on his door came at sunset. Joe opened it to find a young soldier in dress. Uniform, crisp, perfect. The kind of uniform Joe had worn a lifetime ago. "Mr. Martinez, I'm Sergeant Rodriguez. I'm here to escort you to the ceremony." "What ceremony?" "Sir, you're being honored at the VA hospital for your service, both in Vietnam and here at home." Joe looked down at his clothes. Wrinkled shirt. Stained pants. "I'm not dressed for a ceremony." "Sir, we brought you something." The sergeant held up a garment bag. Inside, a perfect dress uniform, Joe's old rank insignia. Ribbons he'd earned in blood and terror. "How did you?" "The Pentagon sent your service record, sir." "All of it, including the classified parts." Joe's hands shook as he touched the uniform. "I can't. People hate me. They think I'm a thief." "Sir, they don't know who you are, but they're about to find out." Asterisk, the VA hospital was packed. The parking lot overflowed with cars. News vans lined the street. Inside, the main lobby had been transformed. A stage, flowers, hundreds of people. Joe sat in the back of the government car. Uniform perfect, heart hammering. Through the tinted windows, he could see the crowd. Veterans in wheelchairs. Hospital staff. Families. The same people who'd watched him get arrested. "I can't do this," he whispered. Sergeant Rodriguez turned around. "Sir, do you know what Operation Phoenix was?" "I can't talk about it. You can now." "It's been declassified, all of it." Joe closed his eyes. Operation Phoenix. The most dangerous mission of the war. Deep in enemy territory. No backup, no support. Just 12 men against an entire regiment. "Sir, do you know how many men made it out?" Joe's voice was barely audible. 3. "Do you know how many Vietnamese soldiers you and your team saved?" "We didn't save anyone. We were just trying to survive." "Sir, you saved 437 South Vietnamese troops. You held off an entire enemy division for 3 days. You called in airstrikes on your own position twice. You carried wounded men 12 miles through the jungle," Joe remembered. The endless gunfire, the screaming, the weight of wounded soldiers on his back. You were recommended for the Medal of Honor, but the mission was classified. You couldn't be recognized. Until now. The ceremony began with the national anthem. Joe stood backstage, legs trembling. Through a gap in the curtains, he could see the crowd. Veterans, families, hospital staff. Some of the same people who'd called him a thief. Director Harrison's replacement took the stage. A woman Joe didn't recognize. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here tonight to right a wrong. To honor a man who served with extraordinary courage, both in war and in peace," the crowd murmured. Confused, they'd come expecting a standard ceremony. 3 months ago, a member of our VA family was falsely accused of a crime. Joseph Martinez was framed by people who wanted to silence him, to prevent him from speaking about his service in Vietnam. Surprised gasps, whispers. Joe could feel the mood shifting. What you don't know is who Joseph Martinez really is. The lights dimmed. A screen descended. Images filled it. Jungle, helicopters, young soldiers with haunted eyes. In 1970, Sergeant Martinez was part of Operation Phoenix, a classified mission deep in enemy territory. His team was surrounded, outnumbered 20-1. They were supposed to extract intelligence and get out. More images, maps, radio transcripts, classified documents. Instead, they found 400 South Vietnamese soldiers trapped behind enemy lines, wounded, dying, abandoned. Joe's throat tightened. He remembered their faces. So young, so scared. Sergeant Martinez and his team could have completed their mission and left. Instead, they chose to stay. To fight. To die if necessary. The screen showed Joe's young face. His military portrait. A boy who'd become a man in the jungle. For 3 days, 12 American soldiers held off an entire enemy division. They called in airstrikes on their own position. They carried wounded men through 12 miles of hostile territory. They saved 437 lives. The crowd was silent now, stunned. Only 3 Americans survived. Sergeant Martinez was one of them. He was recommended for the Medal of Honor, but the mission was classified. He couldn't be recognized. He couldn't be honored. He couldn't even tell his family. Joe felt tears running down his cheeks. 50 years of silence. 50 years of carrying those memories alone. For the past 37 years, Sergeant Martinez has worked in this hospital. He's cleaned floors, emptied trash, fixed broken things. He's been invisible, unnoticed, unappreciated. The screen showed images of the hospital, Joe mopping floors, Joe helping patients, Joe working Christmas mornings while others celebrated with family. But he never stopped serving. Never stopped caring. Never stopped being the hero he was in that jungle 50 years ago. The crowd rose to their feet as Joe walked onto the stage. The applause was thunderous, overwhelming. Veterans in wheelchairs saluted. Hospital staff wiped away tears. Families cheered. Joe stood at the podium, looking out at hundreds of faces. Many he recognized. The nurse who'd helped with his defense. The security guard who'd arrested him. The reporter who'd painted him as a criminal. "I don't know what to say," he began, his voice shaking. "You don't have to say anything, sir." The voice came from the back of the room. The crowd parted as a figure walked forward. A man in military uniform, stars gleaming on his shoulders. General Patricia Williams. The same Colonel Williams who'd called him in prison. She walked onto the stage and stopped in front of Joe. The room was dead silent. "Sergeant Martinez," she said, her voice carrying across the crowd. "I'm here on behalf of the President of the United States and the Department of Defense." She opened the blue box. Inside, a medal gleamed. "For extraordinary heroism in combat. For valor above and beyond. The call of duty. For 50 years of silent service to your country and your fellow veterans." Joe's knees buckled. The general caught his arm. "Sir," she said, her voice soft but clear, "it's an honor to finally meet you." She pinned the medal to his uniform. The Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest award for valor. "I'm sorry it took so long." The reception lasted hours. Veterans lined up to shake Joe's hand, to thank him, to apologize. Hospital staff who'd watched him get arrested now looked at him with wonder. A young soldier approached. Iraqi war veteran, Joe could tell by the careful way he walked. IED injuries. "Sir, I wanted to thank you." "For what, son?" "For cleaning my room. For helping me to the bathroom when I was too proud to ask the nurses. for treating me like a person when I felt like a broken thing." Joe's eyes filled with tears. "You were never broken, son. Just healing. You did that for a lot of us. Before anyone knew who you were." More veterans approached. Stories poured out. Small kindnesses. Moments of dignity preserved. Acts of service that had gone unnoticed for decades. Joe had been a hero in the jungle. But he'd been a hero in the hospital too. The news story ran on every channel. This time, they got it right. They showed the real Joe Martinez. The young soldier who'd saved hundreds of lives. The janitor who'd served with quiet dignity for nearly 4 decades. Social media exploded with apologies, with shame, with recognition of how quickly they'd judged, how easily they'd been manipulated. Hero. Janitor falsely accused. The invisible veteran who served in silence. A nation owes an apology. Joe didn't watch the coverage. He was too busy. The VA offered him his job back. With a promotion, with honors, with a salary that reflected his true worth. Joe declined. Instead, he accepted a different position. Veterans advocate. His job was to help other veterans navigate the system, to make sure they got the care they'd earned, to ensure their stories were heard. He had an office now. A real office with windows and a door that closed. His medals hung on the wall, but they weren't what mattered most. What mattered were the photos, veterans he'd helped, families he'd connected with, services, young soldiers who'd found hope in his story. What mattered was the work. 1 year later, Joe Martinez stood at another podium. This time, it was the Pentagon. The highest honor ceremony of the year. He was receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor in the country. The president herself presented the award. Cameras flashed. The crowd included generals and senators and foreign dignitaries, but Joe's eyes were on the small section reserved for veterans, his veterans. The ones he'd helped. The ones who'd found their way back to dignity. They were the real heroes. "Mr. Martinez," the president said, "your story reminds us that heroism isn't always loud. It isn't always visible. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's invisible. Sometimes it's found in the smallest acts of service." Joe nodded. He thought about all those mornings cleaning floors, all those nights helping confused veterans find their way, all those moments when nobody was watching. But invisible doesn't mean unimportant. Your service in war and in peace has touched thousands of lives. You've shown us that true heroism isn't about the uniform you wear or the medals on your chest. It's about the choice to serve, even when nobody's watching, even when nobody cares, even when the world thinks you're nobody. The president paused, looked directly at Joe. "Mr. Martinez, you are somebody. You've always been somebody. And we're sorry it took us so long to see it." The ceremony ended with the national anthem. Joe stood at attention, medal heavy on his chest, surrounded by the most powerful people in the country. But his mind was elsewhere. He thought about the young soldier who'd visited him in the hospital, the Iraqi war veteran who'd thanked him for treating him like a person, the hundreds of veterans who'd found hope in his story. He thought about the jungle, the weight of wounded soldiers on his back, the choice to stay when he could have run. He thought about the hospital, 37 years of invisible service, the choice to serve when nobody was watching. The same choice. Again and again, the anthem ended. The crowd applauded. Cameras flashed. Joe Martinez, hero, janitor, advocate, legend stood tall. He'd always been somebody. Now the world knew it too. Epilogue. 2 years later, the Joseph Martinez Veterans Center opened its doors, a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to helping veterans transition back to civilian life. Job training, mental health services, housing assistance. Everything Joe had wished for during his decades of service. The opening ceremony was small. Just Joe, a few veterans, and some hospital staff. No cameras, no politicians, no fanfare. Joe stood in the lobby, looking at the wall of photos. Veterans he'd helped, success stories, new beginnings. A young woman approached, Marine uniform. Recent discharge, he could tell. "Sir, I'm looking for help. I heard you might be able to point me in the right direction." Joe smiled. "Of course. What do you need?" "I'm not sure. Everything's so confusing. I feel lost." "You're not lost," Joe said gently. "You're just finding your way. Come on, let's get you some help." They walked deeper into the center, past the photos, past the awards, past the recognition, toward the work that mattered, the work that had always mattered. Joe Martinez had spent 50 years being invisible. Now he was helping others find their way into the light.